What is time? I can't see it. I can't smell it. I can't hear it. Does time really exist? In tonight's legitimate film review, we're forced to ask a very philosophical question. What is time? David Tennant is just your regular run-of-the-mill ex-Special Forces FBI agent on a secondment to the CIA. During a routine raid on a mercenary-controlled opera house, David discovers that time travel exists when he walks in on himself teabagging a recently fallen enemy. David freaks out about the Geneva Convention, beating the absolute shit out of himself before future David escapes under a garage door in what he calls, and I quote, some motherfucking Indiana Jones on rewind shit. It's at this point David Tennant learns that there's a special organisation of time travellers called Time Team who use backwards time recalibrators to flip the direction of time in a process they colloquially have termed pushing time's shit in. The art of pushing time's shit in, or time pushing, for the sake of brevity when in the field, requires relearning everything they know about physics. It means rewriting the book on cause and effect. It requires spare oxygen and includes a voucher for a special consultation with stunt driver Ken Block for reverse Tokyo drifting lessons. After discovering the secret world of time travel, David Tennant meets a man claiming to be his future dad. His relation from another generation says that he has to stop his future self teabagging the president of the UN. His dad says future David Tennant's actions end up creating a timeline where the UN invades time itself in retaliation. David agrees to help, but asks why can't he just decide not to teabag the president of the UN right now and change the whole course of history. His father says, sorry son, that's just not how this works. The future you has already learned backwards physics from his perspective. In your distant future, he, or you, or to simplify things, you, push time shit in to come back through to our time and teabag the whole UN by proxy of its beloved leader. From future David's perspective, the decision to hang sack in the face of an internationally revered diplomat was made long ago in his past, or future as the case may be. David Tennant Jr. asks David Tennant Sr. Jr. what the head of the UN could possibly have done to piss future David off so much. The elder, but actually younger, of the two men says he doesn't know, but it must have been fairly extreme because it made future David Tennant Jr. mad enough to go permanent backwards. Junior doesn't quite get what he's saying. The older, wiser, chronologically more anachronistic of the two Tennants says future Tennant Jr. had to permanently relearn shower physics, watches all of his TV shows backwards, and swims backstroke everywhere at the pool. But that's mostly because he never learned how lane markers work. David Tennant's dad sends him to a scientist who is a bit like a lady version of Q from James Bond, inventing special magnet gloves to pickpocket enemies of their bullets before they can put one in their gun and shoot it at her. She says if this technology had been around earlier, we may not have experienced all those centuries of bullet crime. She tells David about an infamous crime lord named Ivanovich Drago, who is also the owner of the most advanced time-pushing technology in the whole world. The lady inventor suspects that Ivanovich's constant moonwalking everywhere is a side effect of being permanent backwards. Ivanovich tries to hide it better than future David Tennant, learning to fake talk forwards and blinking correctly so no one suspects his long-term exposure to time-pushing tech has made him unable to unpush. The lady, whose name by now David is embarrassed not to have asked, says that while cleaning up all the vomit and sawdust from the Sochi Olympic Games, Ivanovich discovered a briefcase with the patents and instructions for pushing time's shit in. It had been sent to him from the future, presumably by himself. Ivanovich formed an LLC and began selling devices that made time go faster to organisers of tennis tournaments. Ivanovich became rich, but didn't anticipate that his egalitarian oversight of the time speeder upper a factory floor was exposing him to a constant low-level time-pushing field. By the time Igor realised he was going primarily backwards through time, he was already in love with a hot woman, who, like the majority of other women he knew, was travelling forwards through time. Igor asked her to go backwards with him, but she had just started a new job as a professional competitive eater, and she was afraid of the digestive ramifications this could have, ultimately choosing her career. David says this sounds like a guy who can advise him on how to outpush his future self. David sets out to find Ivanovich and get in his good graces by tracking down the woman he loves and seducing her. David's lifelong career as a deep state operative has significantly underprepared him for the task of charming beautiful women. His attempts to be mysterious and alluring don't land well in a group setting, and his ham-fisted double entendres both upset the lady and infuriate their host, Ivanovich Drago. David is escorted outside by two henchmen who confide that even as regularly re-registered sex offenders, they are both appalled by his behaviour on behalf of all women. Ivanovich's goons take David to the train station, setting an alarm so he doesn't miss his train out of town. They tell him, don't come back again, or don't come forward again if you're going backwards at the time. He says he thinks he gets what they mean. They say, shut up, then leave him there tied to a chair. He wonders how they meant him to get to the train, soon watching it leave. David pisses and shits his pants several times over the course of a weekend before having an awkward exchange with one of his colleagues who just happens to be walking by for ice cream with his dog. David says he's fine and tells the colleague not to come any closer to untie him, conscious of the smell. Eventually, David seeks help from a train conductor who is looking for a place to hide stolen railway stationery. The next day, at Time Team, David tells the story to his friend Chad, who agrees to coach David in his next attempt to pick up Ivanovich's on-again, off-again girlfriend. Chad's first advice is to find her a present, asking what she's into. David says she really likes art, he thinks. David and Chad set up an elaborate scheme to rob an art gallery using their time-pushing ability in a caper they officially call Operation Bribe Lady. During the heist, they steal a piece that Ivanovich's ex specifically said she likes. When David shows up at the lady's office to brag about the crime and attempt to arrange a sexual quid pro quo, it becomes apparent that he never learned or has long forgotten Ivanovich's ex-girlfriend's name. And after a terse exchange, he leaves, derailing most of the pickup routine Chad had helped him memorize earlier in the day, and forgetting to give her the framed original cover template of Where's Waldo This Time. Ivanovich sends more henchmen to pick up David, kicking his head in for a bit and threatening to run him over with a yacht. David tells Ivanovich that he's something of a yachtsman himself, challenging the heavily accented billionaire to a yacht-off, or as they call it in the nautical space, a regatta. Ivanovich agrees, but on the day David gets confused and climbs into the wrong boat, getting far out into the bay before the two of them realise what's happened. They strike up a conversation about time pushing, and David tells Ivanovich that his organisation Time Team has the cure for going permanent backwards. Ivanovich is intrigued. He asks what David wants in return for Time Team's help. David says he needs to stop his future self teabagging the president of the UN. Ivanovich agrees, offering David access to his time-pushing equipment and his weekly Zoom session with Ken Block. David is surprised how itchy his crotch feels while going backwards. It's the one thing he probably should have expected but never thought to ask about. He keeps wanting to adjust his underpants, but has already done it so many times that it's beginning to prompt backwards disgusted looks from strangers on the street. David is out time-pushing one afternoon with Chad, practicing the J-turns that Ken Block taught them when Ivanovich ambushes them in what David and Chad call a backwards double-cross, but Ivanovich references simply as the intended regular direction single-cross. David learns from the henchmen that Ivanovich is actually the future president of the UN. It all makes sense, sort of. Ivanovich takes David to a time flipper, sending him forwards while interrogating his ex-girlfriend backwards in the next room. After making some edgy threats that would be a bit unpleasant to walk back, or in this case forward, Ivanovich unshoots his ex-girlfriend. He feels bad about it afterwards, or in this case before, but like most abusive ex-boyfriends, or in this case abusive future boyfriends-to-be, he just goes and salves the many conflicting emotions with a large Whopper value meal at Hungry Jack's. Chad and David take the lady, whose name they still have not figured out amongst the two of them by now, back through the time-flipping device, and back in time to before she got shot, unbulleting her. Together the three of them concoct a plan to go further back in time, to the day of Ivanovich's birthday, before he even met David, and knew about Time Team, and before he even thought about running for the UN presidential primaries, to steal his time factory and prevent his candidacy in the ultimate triple cross, in what was originally called Operation Dumbo Undrop, but had to be renamed Operation Couldn't Get Elephant. David, Chad, that lady, and all of Time Team will reverse ambush, or pre-bush, Ivanovich and his henchmen, doing a so-called temporal pincer move against his main time flipper and a more straightforward human-handed move against him on his yacht by his ex. Only in the era they were still dating, so now his future ex-girlfriend-to-be. David thinks he is going into battle with Time Team, not realizing that he is their future leader. Most of these soldiers are following him, as they're from the future, essentially in a big circle. While their pincer move turns out to be more of a dog-legged thrust right into the enemy's preferred theatre of combat, Chad manages to boost Time Team's morale by hot-wiring an enemy car with cool mag wheels. David catches one of Ivanovich's henchmen about to blow the whole place up, but manages to stop him just in time. David is happy to have pincered the henchman, but a guy with an authoritative beard says that's not what pincer means. Meanwhile, the lady is back on the yacht preparing a trap that she saw on a cartoon once. She makes one side of the yacht really slippery, then shouts, "Hey look, a whale!" When Ivanovich doesn't respond, she acts all surprised and goes, "Holy shit, it's two whales and they're fighting." When Ivanovich still fails to run over to the side of the boat to look, she says, "Fuck it," and just shoots him anyway, then makes him roadrunner off the side of the boat just to scratch that itch, knowing it's the one time she will be in this situation probably. David meets up with Chad and the beard guy at the top of a mountain. They each have one of Ivanovich's time speeding up devices. Chad says he's going to use it to break the ice faster with ladies he meets on the bus. The beard guy obviously wants to grow out his beard faster, and David is just happy to go and see some good old tennis.
Some tennis, yeah, with David Tenet, please, be on for some tennis.